Okay, so let's look at the 8th line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, the 8th line. Okay, so go ahead and play the 8th line.
That's a little quick.
Yeah. Okay, you should recognize that this line is the same as the first line, except for that roll in the beginning. Right. So the first line is this. Okay, and then with the roll. So that roll, let's talk about that roll. You know, it's almost kind of slow to play it as 16th notes. So you could double it up. Here's the with 16th notes. So a way to make those 16th notes, if you do play the 16th note roll, just make sure you're really loose with those rolls. Try not to do that. And when I say loose, like almost the type of roll where one hand is still buzzing as the other one hits. So you don't hear the beating in between like this would be. Which is what most people do. I felt like you played that pretty well. Okay, so let's look at the 9th line. Oh, hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Skipped one.
Yeah, 9th line.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Did the same thing.
Yeah, you did.
Yep.
And you know, it took you a few beats to kind of settle into your tempo. Always, before you play anything, always have in your head what you want it to sound like, then play it. Don't ever feel like you're rushed to play anything. Even if you're in an audition or a competition or anything, don't stand up to the snare drum and immediately start playing. Feel free to take a breath, think about the tempo in your head. Know for sure how you want to play it before you play it. Okay, do it again. Yeah, you did the same thing again at the end there. I feel like sometimes your triplets aren't too different than your 16th notes. It's almost like you're playing them at the speed of quintuplets, you know, instead of sextuplets. You have a lot of gear changes in here where you go from, like, you know, quarter notes and 8th notes, 16 notes, 16-note triplets, 32nd notes. I mean, you got a lot of gear changes in here. You got to make sure they sound different. Don't slur any of it. Try to be very accurate with it. So if you look at just the first measure of the 8th, is it the 8th line? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, the 9th line. Play just that much. Okay, that was a lot better. Something to think about with your roll too. You're supposed to play a forte roll, so try to not make it a I start at forte and get softer with my roll. Try to keep it up. Alright, and then the last measure of that line. Try that.
The whole line or last measure?
Last measure of the 9th line. Ba-da-da, 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 ba-da. Good. Alright, that was better. Okay, so 10th line. Second to last line. Try that. Okay, I think you could exploit the dynamic differences a lot more. And then you did something interesting, but you fixed it. Second beat of the first measure, you played that 5-stroke roll.
Yeah.
As a 5-stroke roll, really slow, but because of that, it sounded kind of choppy. But then when the 5-stroke roll came up again, in the second measure, you played that like a 9-stroke roll, so you doubled the speed of it, and that sounded a lot better. So exploit your dynamics more. When you got slow rolls like that, you may want to speed them up to increase this, the sound quality of them. But that's about it with that one. Okay, so let's look at the last measure, or not last measure, last line. Okay, do that again. Be sure that when you isolate these little things as you're practicing, that you're being consistent with the tempo that you're choosing to play it at. I think you played the last line a little slower than some of the other parts when we were working on it, so just as you practice individual stuff and you pull things out like we've been doing, try to stick within that tempo that you're trying to play it at. Yeah, everything with this is just loud. And accent at the end, of course. All right. So, yeah, we just went over everything. I gave you kind of my tidbits on my opinions on each line and each measure. Do you have any questions about any of this?
Lines 8 and 9, those 9-stroke rolls, or right there at the beginning.
Yeah.
Should I be doubling those up, or should I leave them in a 16th note bass?
I think if you want to be consistent with how we're doing the rolls with most of this piece, you would probably double it up. Even though it's a quarter note roll, and traditionally you would do that as a 9-stroke roll, you may, because it's a kind of a slower tempo, you may want to double it up. But again, like that's sort of subjective. Like, listen to how you play these rolls, either as 9-stroke rolls or as I guess it would be 17-stroke rolls, and see what you think sounds better. Sometimes. They do sound very different. Like at a slower tempo, the 9-stroke roll and the 17-stroke roll is going to sound very different when you're putting it in the space of a quarter note. So, it's not a bad idea to even like record yourself and listen to how you sound when you play it both ways, and just pick one. But when it comes time to doing an audition or a competition, and if someone asks you, why you played it that way, have an answer for them. You can say stuff like, well, I didn't play it very well as a 9-stroke roll, so I chose to do it as a 17-stroke roll, and I played it really well that way, and so that's how I play it. Yeah,
so that's more gray area.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it a gray area. It's like, it's still sort of black and white, but it's just more like, if you have 4 16th notes, do you play a paradiddle, or do you play a double-stroke roll, or do you play singles? It's really just kind of a matter of context and preference and sound quality. For this kind of piece, it's a more sound quality than anything else. This is a piece that you play as a snare solo. It's not so much a performance art piece where the visual thing is as important, but if you wanted to make it a visual thing, then you would use probably more alternating sticking and tricky stuff and all that. But usually when people play solos like this, you're in a suit and a tie and you're playing it for an audition, or like a recital or something. It's not really the kind of thing that people play to impress the public at large. So interpretation's kind of a thing, and I wouldn't call it gray area. Like there's a few different interpretations you can choose from. They're not really gray. They're kind of like it's this or this or this maybe, but it's not like that there are other. Like if in these pieces, if it says play a triplet, play a triplet. Don't say, oh, I'm gonna play it more like a quintuplet because I feel it that way. Like that's not how these pieces are written. They're very specific rhythmically, very specific dynamically. You can interpret it in some ways, but for the most part, you can't really change the fact that he wants you to play very different rhythms here, and he wants you to play very different dynamics here. That's obviously what he's trying to tell you to do. That's not really gray. That's kind of black and white.
Right.
Anything else? All right.
I thought I could see.